Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well and safe in your bubbles. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share permaculture with you guys today. You're doing such an amazing job with Garden to Table. I've admired you afar for quite a long while. I'm president of my local garden club, which is near to Meadowbank, and we were lucky enough to have a visit a couple of years ago to the Meadowbank School. So I was really impressed with what was happening there. So I'm going to talk for around 20 minutes. I've got a couple of wee videos to share with you. My presentation is going to be aiming to really get the essence of what permaculture is across to you and set you up for any further questions. We have received quite a few questions from you, which were awesome, and it's helped me to factor those into what I'm going to talk about. And then I'm going to hand over to my tutor and mentor, Gunther Andrasko, who's going to then share with you some of his experiences with designing permaculture in schools itself. I'm also going to share with you something called the Ruth Stout Gardening Without Work method. It's the best kept secret in the world, and I'm sharing it like mad, and we'll find out what that is shortly. Okay, so don't know whether any of you know Jeff Lawton. If you don't, his permaculture videos on YouTube are well worth a look. He has some amazing stuff, and he said all the world's problems can be solved in a garden. Now, some people might sort of throw their eyes in their head at that and say, what do you mean? How can we solve, global warming and peace and all of those things? But in actual fact, I think I can totally understand where he's coming from with permaculture. You can solve all the world's problems through a garden, and I'm going to invite you to think about that whilst Gunther and I are presenting and see if that makes sense to you as well. So our objectives today are, first of all, to share the absolute joys of permaculture. It's something that I'm very passionate about. It's changed my life. Then, as I say, spread the secret of gardening without work, which I'm sure you'll be keen on. One of the questions was, how do we keep gardens going in non-term time? So we think we've got the answer for you there. And then make connections with you guys in something that we're calling our stakeholder guild, through an initiative, a movement we've started called Gift the Garden, and I'll explain a bit more about that right at the end. So, excuse me, what is permaculture? So permaculture is a design approach. So it's looking at your space and designing it to mimic natural systems, to take lessons from nature. Nature doesn't need weeding, feeding, maintaining. If you look at a forest, everything in the system does it naturally as part of its life. And so the design approach that we take is looking at how we can mimic that to reduce work and make a self-regulating system as much as possible to produce a yield, whether that yield be food or wood or just joy and happiness. That we're looking to actually create a yield from that. And through that system, the resilience of the system and the people who are taking part of the system increases, because the system builds and improves, rather than setting up a simple agricultural system where we have to go in each year and add more and more fertilizer, more and more chemicals, etc. It's the opposite of that. And I'm aiming through the principles now to just help you to understand how we do that and to give you some good starters to get going yourselves. Having said that, you're probably doing an awful lot of this already, and it will be interesting in the chat later to find out what you are doing. So what are the key benefits of permaculture? Well, the food, once you set up the system, is truly abundant, and there shouldn't be a food scarcity if everyone had these principles, because nature wants to be abundant. It just needs us to get out of the way or design the system to allow it to be so. And we do less work because we allow nature to do it. We empower nature to do it. We design the system for nature to do it. And part of that is encouraging nature to do what nature does best. So encouraging life to thrive, and we work with all of the different creatures within our space. Building soil is a benefit, but it's also, for me, the number one call to action. We know that soil sequesters carbon, it captures and holds water. We know that across the globe we're losing our soil. And so in our garden spaces are a fantastic place where human beings can do what we do. The one thing we do better than nature and quicker than nature is build soil. A forest takes thousands of years, but we can do it in a compost bin in our back garden in a few weeks. Another benefit is around capturing and recycling energy and water. That's part of the key essence of what we're designing our system for. And that there's no waste, because nature doesn't have waste. Every output is another system's input, another creature's input. And it's naturally low carbon. I suspect a lot of the schools have low carbon goals. And it's beyond that. We actually reverse carbon because soil is a carbon sink. And I'm loving at the moment taking biochar and charcoal out of my fire, my wood burner, putting it in the compost, knowing that that is holding and sequestering carbon into the soil and building the microorganisms. So we're very much working with nature. There are three key ethics, and you'll see this little diagram everywhere in permaculture, because we need a balance of all of these. It's not just about taking care of the environment. It's not just about taking care of people and growing food. It's about doing the both of those in balance. And then fair share is any surplus going back into the system, so that the system grows and strengthens. Working with nature, not against it. You may, I'm not sure of some of your backgrounds, but if you are involved in teaching, you may be familiar with looking at the system in nature. And I really like this little diagram. There's so much learning in permaculture for children. If you just imagine this one system, that just look at the dragonfly there. If the dragonfly were to go extinct, and I don't like focusing on the negative statistics, but we know that we have lost in some countries up to 70% of some of our insects since the war. Just imagine if the dragonfly was to go extinct. Well, you know, the salamander might eat something else, the mosquito, the trout might eat something else, but maybe the mosquito also goes extinct. Then the system is starting to become a bit frail. And so permaculture is working to bolster and improve and strengthen and increase that system, which means that our food is healthier and more abundant as well. So we have in permaculture 12 principles. Now, I don't have time in this presentation to go through all 12, but I'm going to pick on a few simple ones that I think you'll really like. And also, the 12 principles aren't individual, they interact and they work very much together. And I did suggest that you might want to have that handy. And if you haven't, don't worry about it, but go back to it later. And I think we can check out, you know, if we got a good understanding of how these principles interact. So the first one is that I learned really naturally, and I think this is great for children, is to observe first of all. For the First Nation peoples here, the Maori, then the Waitaha, the Kumara growers, they spent a year in their young childhood of just being sent out to observe nature before they were allowed into the gardens. And a couple of things I noticed when I was observing my garden. One is that the silver eyes come down to my bird bath every day, and then they go around and pick off any aphids that are on any of the roses or the other plants. And so in understanding that, I can then interact and make sure that I've got more bird baths in my garden, I've got food that they like to eat, and so that I can really help them to do their job, which means that I don't have a pest problem in my garden. Capture and store energy and obtain a yield, I'm going to cover together. One of the little examples I like to use, though, is I used to pay a gardener a lawnmower to pick up all my cabbage tree leaves, and he charged me $10 for that. And then one day I kind of had a bit of an inspiration looking at them, and I thought, I wonder if these burn. And then I figured out that if you tie them up into a knot, and I then since learned that that's what the Maori did, is they make fire lighting faggots. So I now catch all my cabbage tree leaves, tie them in a knot, throw them in the back of the laundry, and then in the winter we use those as fuel all winter. So that's a good idea. Nothing is waste, everything is a yield, it has some use. Produce no waste, that naturally comes out of what we've been talking about, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. And then the other two that I want to cover off, again, I'm going to bring them together. Use and value diversity. So often we put our vegetable garden at the end of the garden or somewhere because we think it's ugly, and we separate it. And therefore, because it's separate, we have to do a lot of the work that nature would do for those plants, because it's separate from its natural environment. So integrate rather than segregate. And I'll give you some good examples and show you how you can do that. And Candace was great. She sent us some pictures of some of the awesome work that you're doing in Garden to Table across the schools in Auckland. And one of the things that I noticed is the opportunity there for doing even more, because we don't need raised beds. We can start a food forest on a lawn anywhere, and I'll show you some examples of that, and hopefully you'll get quite excited about getting out there with the cardboard and the compost and creating a new environment on your lawn. So I am denied about whether to put this diagram in, but and don't try and read it all. I just want to use it as an illustration of the permaculture principles in action. In the modern world, on the left-hand side, to produce an egg, we have a lot of different systems going on. And if any one of those systems isn't there, then we're going to have a problem. So at the moment, I've had to order click and collect for my chicken food. And you can see that, you know, we need a truck, and we need the manufacturer of the truck, and we need all of those things just to produce an egg. So that's a lot of energy and a lot of process to go into creating an egg. The permaculture approach is to set up and design your space so that the plants provide the food, the chuck's manure provides the compost, provides the feed for the plants, the roof, and that's a little bit of industrial here to get the iron. The roof captures the rainwater that gives the chickens their water. So you can see the system is much more self-regulating. We still have to intervene and interact in some ways, but if there was a global oil crisis, then this system is still going to keep going. This system would grind to a halt. How you set that up and whether you can set that up is then part of the challenge, but hopefully that illustrates the difference between a permaculture approach and a normal modern gardening approach. I thought I'd just share with you, 3 years ago I was involved with, this is one of my designs for Marakau Wirihana, which is in the Manurewa High School. And it was a wonderful experience to work with the school and the Super Clinic and Middlemore Foundation. And the design is a community garden using permaculture principles. One of them we haven't talked about, but this is a rongoa with Maori healing medicines, and we're using edge. We're creating as much edge as possible because diversity and abundance is often on the edge. Here we've got a whole stack of worm farms taking all the food waste from the Super Clinic, of which there is over a ton a year, into the worm farm then to feed the intensive farm, which feeds the school. And then there's an observatory learning area for the children. And they're slowly been hit by COVID quite strongly, but they've been doing some really good work here and getting this going. And I've put there the emphasis on beauty. For me, that's something that I always add into my permaculture work, because I think when you see something as beautiful, it awakens love in your heart, and you actually feel like you want to care for it. So it's important that things are beautiful. Just checking the chat, see if anyone's asked me anything. Okay, so here is just a couple of little detail slides. This is the idea for the learning observatory for the children. That this is using permaculture patterning to have least paths. We've got the idea of having a water capture observatory. They can climb up, they can store vegetables in here. One of the key things about permaculture is everything should have at least 2 functions if it's in the system, and every system, every function needs at least 2 elements supporting it, so that there's redundancy. Bear with me, sorry, my PowerPoint's locked up, there we go. And another little detail, I think I thought this relevant for the schools, because needs to be fun as well, and enjoying, and art is so important, I think, for all of that. And so these ideas like using recycled bottles to create a greenhouse can be done in school with creative, using the water tanks to express art. Lots of ideas there. Okay, so hopefully at this point I've given an idea about the permaculture principles, and so now I'm going to run through and give you 5 simple ideas that you can do at home or in the school. And yeah, we'll take questions on these at the end. So picking up on those permaculture principles, one of the first ones, observe and interact. One of the things you can do, if you haven't, you've probably been doing this already, but I also did a regenerative design course last year with Regenesis, and that was phenomenal for teaching how to really understand your place, what's special about your place, discover your story of place together as a community. Find your watershed. Here is Middlemore School's watershed, and you can see where it sits. I didn't know what a watershed was till I did that course, but you begin to understand how important that is for the community. We all live in a certain watershed. How does it help you to understand the sector that you're in? So if this little house here is what we're analysing, where's the wind coming from? How does the sun impact the garden? What are the microclimates? Where would you position which kind of garden? Some plants like a bit more shade than others, some plants like more sun. Have you got a heavy wind that's going to devastate that you need to maybe redirect? So really understanding your sector, the place, drilling down, looking at for me, I find it most valuable to look at the contours. Once I can see the contours of a place, then it almost begins to design itself. And this is a small garden that I'm working on designing at the moment. And so the front garden here slopes down. So what we've done here is we've created a path which gives a winding journey as the client wants to use it for ecotherapy, to pick through the plants. But the main thing here is that as the water hits the site, it's soaking in to these contour lines into the beds. So the more water we can capture in the winter, the more it's stored in the soil, the more we've built the soil, then the less we have to water in the summer. And that last year with the big drought we had and the water ban is really important. But can't wait to share Ruth's stout with you, because that will really help you to not have to water at all. So here's some ideas of patterns. Using nature's patterns here. This is my garden. I've used the contours to terrace down the hill, and as the water comes down, nothing is wasted, it all gets soaked in. And these beautiful keyhole gardens are amazing, because you need very little path, you can always access. This is something called a herb spiral. It's well known in permaculture parlances. You get little microclimates all the way around for different kinds of herbs. Okay, so that's the first thing, observe and interact and do a sector analysis. And it would be something awesome, I think, to take children through. You probably do a lot of that as well. Look at your soil, analyze your soil. I hadn't talked about that, but what kind of soil do you have? The second easy win is to just focus on building soil. And I'm sure that you're all doing that at the moment in your raised beds, but we can do this across every little inch that isn't covered in tarmac. Let's build soil. So lots of compost, have a worm farm, no dig. I was saying to Gunter, I'm a confirmed no digger at the moment. I won't go into it, but it's all about the fact that there's a city going on underneath the soil. If we dig into it, we're interrupting the actions. If we place compost on the top, all the organisms and the worms come and dig the soil for us as they come to get the food. So, so chop and drop, things like comfrey is a great other green cover crops you can use. And then we'll have a look at the Ruth Stout method. Ruth Stout is something I learned at the Taranaki Garden Festival, which hopefully I'm going to in November again this year. There's a guy there who was radishes were this big, I kid you not. And he just had hay everywhere. And I'll let the little video that I'm going to show explain that a little bit more. But let's see if I can get this one to work. This one is all about soil. So fingers crossed. If not, we'll just keep going.
If you're like most people, you're probably feeling a little hopeless about climate change and the damage we've done to our planet. Well, now there's a new way to look at climate change and how to deal with it that might just turn that hopelessness into hope. Climate change, as we know, is all about too much carbon in our atmosphere. But carbon is not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it, even us. The problem and the solution are simply a matter of balance. Let's step back and look at the 5 pools where carbon is stored on planet Earth. Starting about 500 million years ago, when plants first appeared on land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance between these pools, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then one life form, that would be us, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool, which was pretty much a timeout zone for carbon. We've been burning it for energy, putting into play, and disrupting that balance. The way we manage land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon into the atmosphere. Specifically, we've moved 880 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet and destabilizing our climate. The oceans have absorbed a lot of this excess carbon, throwing off the ocean's balance, resulting in ocean acidification and accelerating a mass extinction of sea life. So in order to save life as we know it, of course we need to stop burning fossil carbon. The big question is, where do we put this excess carbon to get the cycle back in balance? The good news is that the answer is literally right under our feet. It's the soil. Plants, using sunlight and water, naturally perform photosynthesis. They pull carbon in from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of these sugars down through the roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build healthy soil. Voila, carbon moved. The plants pump it in and the soil stores it. Nature's living technology is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost can help regenerate healthy soil, setting up an ongoing feedback loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. Together with other regenerative practices like not tilling the soil, planting trees and cover crops, and planned grazing, we can build and retain billions of tons of soil carbon. This is carbon farming. This is regenerative agriculture. Unlike more carbon in the atmosphere, more carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil, which is nutrient rich and full of life and holds way more water. This means more nutritious food and crops that are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for farmers, families, and everyone who eats. Remember this, the way we grow our food, fiber, and fuel either puts carbon up into our atmosphere or pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of soil is the task of our generation. Our health, the health of our soils, and the health of our planet are one and the same. A little hopeless about climate change.
Okay, so I've just hope that I love that it's just a very short video, and it really does bring it home, the hope that we have and the part that we can play in our home gardens in our cities as well, because there's a lot of space in our cities and our home gardens. I'm not going to talk too much about the soil food web, but hopefully by now you get it, that there's a lot going on in the soil and it's a living organism. It's not, I'm always amazed people call it dirt. It is actually living, and building it is really important. So I'm just going to share the Ruth Stout method through a little video that was made in my place, and seeing is probably better than me talking about it.
Gardens for well-being is not just the well-being of me or the people who own the garden, but it's the well-being of all the other creatures that live here as well. What enables us to do it is, first of all, using the Ruth Stout no-work gardening method, which is 6 inches of hay or compost at least on all your soil. So one of the key permaculture principles is to take care of your soil. Everything begins with the soil. A lot of people don't realize how many living organisms there are in the soil. And in this space here, in my 1/4 acre section, there's an elephant size of microorganisms living in my soil that needs to be fed all the time.
So Panda will sell bales from her farm. They're $25.
And so when you feed your soil with hay or comfrey tea, the soil is then feeding the plants. The microorganisms in the soil are feeding the plants.
Okay. And that's how I met Candace when she came to get some hay for one of your projects there.
Gardens for well-being is not just the well-being of
losing the plot on my technology,
me or the people who own the garden, but it's the well-being of all the.
Go away, Amanda. Right, go back in, share again. Okay, so we've just got 2 final ideas that you can take away to share, and then I'm going to hand over to Gunter to give you some examples in schools. So I think you're getting the idea already about hay. Now there's lots of grass everywhere. We can grow it long. This is my berm. I created a yield here from growing it long, turning it into hay, put wildflowers in it so it looked pretty. And people are worried, is it going to look scruffy? Well, we mowed a nice strip around it so everyone can see it was being useful, and then we can get it straight onto the crops. Weeds are yields. I love making all sorts of foods at the moment with the onion weed. It's highly edible. It's a great substitute for spring onions, and the flowers are delicious. And I'm thinking you probably already do this, take the kids around hunting for different materials to put into your compost. So here's some ideas of what you can do. You can get really creative with letting your grass grow, and it becomes a fantastic habitat whilst you're doing it for wildlife. Okay, so next simple thing to do for yourself is the combination of using and valuing diversity and integrate, don't segregate. That's those 2 principles over here. So look after the birds. They work really hard for us. I learnt this to my peril when I covered up one of my front garden beds because my blackbird was merrily tossing out all the mulch looking for slugs, and it was messy. So I covered it up, and within 6 weeks I had a slug problem. I uncovered it, invited the blackbird back in, and just swept the mess. Lots of things we're doing with them. I'm going to talk about the gift the garden concept, is taking construction waste, making habitats for our insects. We rapidly need to boost the numbers of our insects. And one of the ways you can do this is create a food forest. Food forests are, we don't have to grow food in annual beds that we dig over and pull things out. We can get a permanent system going. This is a gorgeous one down in New Plymouth. And you can create this kind of food forest rapidly in a weekend with some cardboard, some deep compost and some hay or bark mulch. And that food forest will then grow and deliver for you for years to come with very little work. So the final idea is, and you're probably doing a lot of this as well, is just in any way you can capture and store energy in your space and your place. And these are my bees capturing sunlight for me in the way of honey. I've just set up one of these maze little mini systems here. I'm going to link them all the way down the hill from my shed. Pop some comfrey in so it's also feed, solar, wind if you can. But there are lots of very simple ways. Just planting more trees captures and stores energy. So that's the 12 principles of permaculture that we visited, really the ones that I think are probably most important to look at initially. And yeah, so that observe, interact, look at your space, do a sector analysis, capture and store energy to obtain a yield, produce no waste, every input is somebody else's output and vice versa. Integrate everything, make the whole school a food garden. I think that was what impressed me about the Meadowbank, was that every inch was gardened, and bring in that biodiversity and use it. And so that brings me to the end of the presentation from me about permaculture. Going on from that, and again, how I become involved with Candace, I'm involved in an initiative called Gift the Garden, and here's some of the organisations that are involved with it. And it's about rapidly bringing permaculture principles into gardens in Auckland. One of the big things is working with Naylor Love in the construction industry to take construction waste and use it to create structures and systems in the garden, and then building soil and really creating that biodiversity. So as you can see in the logo, we're going to be encouraging insects and biodiversity, letting our grass grow, creating lots of food through sustainable permaculture systems. So turning lawn to lunch, waste to wealth, and nurturing with nature.